Wow, how cool, how exciting. That, for those of you keeping score, Jack Rose. Tell you what, still the man. Still the man. Kensington Blues, Jack Rose, love it. Probably gonna get us copyright stricken, but you know, what are you gonna do? It's a Friday night, and we're feeling pretty good. Playing some Jack Rose. What are you gonna do? Not play Jack Rose? Hello, everybody. Um, I'm back, and we are gonna talk some Stafford beer, kind of just some movement stuff. Again, I kind of don't really know what I'm doing, so we'll see. Um, Mike Frame says, "So is Stafford beer? Hang on, this is all fucked up. Why is this all fucked up? Hang on. Is Stafford beer the antithesis to Milton Friedman? Herbert Gintis died last month. Have you discussed his work at all? His position as an ex-Marxist and critiques seem valid. We'll have to give it a look. You might have suggested this a long time ago. I don't actually really remember. Antithesis to Milton Friedman? One can only hope. Um, I don't know if he is the antithesis really to anything. I feel like he's just kind of his own dude, just kind of hanging out. Um, yeah. So what do we got here? We got the viable system model. That's pretty exciting. I think the first thing I wanted to talk about, because we're going to talk about a few different things. What up, Marcus? Hello, hello. The text is white, isn't it? So you kind of can't really see that. Do I want to fix that now? Let me see if I can fix that now. I feel like I can do that quickly. How about if I just do this? Yeah, that might fix. That might fix it. We'll see. Who knows? I wanted to talk about real quick before we get into the kind of like organizational stuff. Just to kind of quickly talk about the simplified model of the VSM here, because on the last stream I did last week, we were talking ecology and all sorts of stuff like that. And I was kind of trying to talk about the debate between the sickos, what are their names? Jason W. Moore on one end, who's kind of like the world ecology guy. He rocks. We love him around these parts. And John Bellamy Foster, who we also love around these parts, as, you know, the metabolic rift guy. And I was kind of trying to parse those details because, you know, a lot of times on like the Marxist left or whatever, just the left in general, or, you know, just in social groups or whatever. But specifically, I feel like on left podcasts, people are always trying to be like, what is the correct thing to read? Who is the correct person to have read? And I feel like I've kind of strayed into that a bit with Jason Moore just because I really appreciate his ontology a lot, talking about like you can't talk about humanity and nature. You have to talk about humanity in nature and nature and humanity. It's just one big thing, dude. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever, man. But I really appreciate that. But I also really appreciate John Bellamy Foster. So to tie it in with Stafford Beer here, I think that nobody's ever. I've come to the conclusion that I don't think anybody's ever really going to solve that debate without reading some cybernetics or just systems theory at all. Just read any kind of systems theory. And the reason for that is um, what you're seeing right in front of you. I think the emphasis that Stafford Beer places on the environment as well as the system, I think just kind of boom, it just kind of solves it. It's you don't have to think about one or the other. You don't have to think about one in the other. It balances out John Bellamy Foster because it's like you are kind of viewing all of this, you know, management here or the meta system, whatever you want to call it, the operations and your fucking environment over here. Um, you can kind of look at it all as one thing, but it doesn't maybe go quite as far as Jason Moore does with his kind of whole oikios ontology stuff like that. So, what I'm trying to say is, I appreciate the way that this kind of splits everything up into three kind of separate systems, although not really. It's kind of just like two. But if you are trying to study a system, the best way to do it is to place it in its environment and also study that. Because if you don't, then you're going to have a hard time. And that isn't to say that the environment is some external thing or whatever entirely and that doesn't affect the system at all. In fact, says the exact opposite. So I dig it. I think when it comes down to maybe the red-green debates, maybe I firmly take the stance of just kind of read some systems theory because maybe that's what it's all about. So we'll get back to this in a second, but just to show you what book this is from, if I can zoom out here. This is Diagnosing the System for Organizations. You can find this book for free, which you shouldn't do, if you find the link to a certain Z library website, which you also shouldn't do. They have all of Stafford Beer's books available, and if you would like that link, I don't know, maybe I know somebody, but I also don't. So if you know what I'm saying. But anyways, whatever, however you get your hands on his books, because his books are extremely expensive, and like I'm not sure who's actually still publishing them. Um, Give them a read, because they're very, very good. But we will come back to this. We will come back to diagnosing the system for organizations. Um, but for now, I think I kind of wanted to start talking about this paper. Marx and the Politics of the First International, George C. Comninel. So, one second. We read one of his books, his most well-known book for the show, Rethinking the French Revolution. And it very much, I think, changed our viewpoints on a lot of historiography and the way that we just study history in general. He is kind of the man. He's interesting. He's definitely a Marxist, but when he was studying the French Revolution, he kind of like tried to take as much as he could from the critiques of the social interpretation of the French Revolution, which is to say the social interpretation as the revolution as the birth of capitalism in France and the death of the aristocracy. He says that isn't actually what happens. That isn't actually the case if you look at the historical record. And I think he's right, but he still doesn't abandon Marx, and he basically just says you actually need to apply Marx's methodology as portrayed in Capital to earlier systems if you want to ever get things done. Because he basically says Marx was wrong about the French Revolution, but that's okay because Marx understood how to study history. So if we do what he said in terms of studying history, then you'll have a much better understanding of the French Revolution. And so I came across this paper, and I figured it could be a good one to have a look at. I've been kind of mulling over this thought in my mind of like, what is it that made the First International different to like everything else, I guess, or like anything that has maybe been tried since, even though there have been like 5 internationals technically. What is it that made the First International different from, first of all, like Bakuninism, because Bakunin gets booted out or whatever, or well, actually it just kind of destroys the First International. So different to like this kind of Blanquist subterfuge adventurism, let's just go do a revolution, man, because it's going to kick ass, which I respect. Sounds very fun. What makes this different to that in the sense of it clearly wasn't like a Leninist thing, right? Obviously because Lenin wasn't born, but also because it wasn't like, if you read what is to be done, Lenin isn't necessarily being like, do the First International. And so I was wondering like, what makes it different? Because Marx talks a lot about like, you don't want to laud over the working class, because if you do, and even if you're able to have a successful revolution, you're going to, if you're telling them what to do, you're going to inevitably run into having to do a little bit of cheeky revolutionary terror. And Marx says that if you ever run into that, then you've basically shown that the working class, wherever you're trying to do your revolution, isn't quite ready. And so this gets into the whole thing about Marx saying the work of emancipating the working class, is like the work of the working class itself, and not just like a bunch of schmucks who want to like head down to Lyon and like overthrow the government with like a handful of 5 dudes, which again sounds very fun, but didn't work then and like definitely wouldn't work now. So I kind of wanted to figure out, what is it about the First International that led Marx to like put his name behind it and throw his weight behind it, as much weight as he had. I don't think he had very much going into this. So I figured we could start. He starts off, I haven't been through this whole thing yet. I've just kind of picked out little bits that I thought could be good to read. But he basically begins it here by saying that Marx, by the time that the First International kind of started, because Marx wasn't involved with getting it going, Comninel here is trying to make the point that it is like, it came from the working class, and it was 100% a working class effort, blah, 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 blah. I actually don't technically know the history behind whether or not that's true. I think it probably is. But he's starting it off by saying that Marx was like really busy trying to finish Capital while it was getting done. And so for Marx to kind of, want to be like, okay, I'm writing this monumental 6-volume work, but I'm also gonna, make it my day job to not only hassle Engels for money. Sorry if the street's loud, it's just gonna be loud. I live near a busy street. But not only hassle Engels for money, that's my real day job, but also, join this First International thing and really try and get it going. So I'll read a bit of it here. just starting with this bit. He says, whereas Marx wrote the first manuscript, comprising the contribution. When he says contribution, he means a contribution to the critique of political economy, which would like go on to become Capital, right? And the Grundrisse, at a time of deepening economic crisis, writing to Engels that he was working like mad all night and every day to get it at least in rough shape before the deluge. The 1860s were on the whole a relatively prosperous period, but then he says the next significant crisis did in fact not incur until 1873, the onset of the Long Depression lasting until 1896. Much of the attention of the working class in the 1860s was directed towards the issues of international politics, such as the Civil War. So I don't know if this sounds familiar to anybody, but he's basically saying that at this point, I'll scroll down so we can see a bit more of it, there might have been a bit of a lull in revolutionary activity, which is like, wow, not really what we think of when we think of the 1860s or just like the 19th century in general. But if you really think about it, comparing it to like, you know, the July days or whatever, 1830s, that was a monumentally revolutionary period in France. And then you get the revolutions in 1848, and it seems like everyone, their mother and their dog, were like getting together to overthrow the government, or at least try to. And then things, you know, compared to then in the 1860s, perhaps not so much. 1848 definitely led to like how you say, maybe a bit of a reactionary period in Europe, where you know, you had a lot of people trying to be like, how about the working class never does that again? So you had a lot of governments in place being like, no, we're going to stop doing this. Don't let these people have any more of their revolutionary fun times. Working class must work, and that's about it. And I do think it's interesting that he's basically saying that the working class was really interested in the American Civil War. So I mean, if we're specifically talking about, you know, the working class in England, then I would say that makes a lot of sense, right? Because obviously England was very connected to the war. We'll go into a bit here where during the first meetings of the IWA, the International Working Men's Association, the First International or whatever, a lot of it was dedicated to the Trade Union Congress in England, trying to be like, you know, we should really lobby the government to not join the war on the side of the Confederates, because that'd be bad. And also, the British textile industry was heavily, obviously, connected to the cotton industry in the South, which meant that they had kind of a vested interest in slavery, which we don't really like. Hey, what's up, Donal? How you doing? We're just going through this paper, if you've just joined, one from George Comninel, to kind of try and understand what made the First International kind of like different from, like, why did Marx want to put his name behind it, right? Like, what made it different to just, like, obviously it was different to like a Blanquista sect, or, you know, something, you know, just like Bakunin going around having a bit of an adventure. But we'll get into later why it was also not like a Leninist party, right? Obviously, Lenin not anywhere close to being alive, but, you know, what are you going to do? Or not close to being a revolutionary. So we're just getting into a bit of the historical background here, and then I think we're going to go in to kind of talk a little bit about some Stafford beer later on, and to maybe see, are there any connections between the IWA and trying to organize effectively? We'll see why Marx was a goddamn left com. Also, we'll do that. So, Comninel here, he talks about how, I'll just get right into it. He says, when the Communist League was formed in 1847 through merger with the League of the Just, which is a very good name. I feel like we've run out of all of the good names, honestly, for revolutionary parties or groups. And the Communist Correspondence Committee of Brussels, maybe not such a good name, of which Marx and Engels were founding members. It was a secret organization committed to a revolution that would end existing class society and usher in a new age of equality and true human freedom. So this gets into like a big question, right, of like, how secretive do you actually want to be with your revolutionary party, with what you're doing, if the goal is to build up the working class's capabilities on their own. You need to get them to trust you, obviously, and to trust themselves. And if you're going around being really secretive, perhaps not the best way to do it, is what I would say. But there's a fine line, as we'll see here. So Comninel goes on to say that secrecy was, of course, still necessary for a group dedicated to revolution. With its reorganization, the League commissioned Marx and Engels to write its statement of purchase, which became the Communist Manifesto. Blah, 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 which could hardly have been more explicit in its call for revolution, which is, yeah, obviously, like, yes, the last line is like, get up off your asses and do things, do the revolution. So, obviously, they were like, we are a revolutionary group aimed at the revolutionary overthrow of society. So then he goes on to say, what is so striking, in contrast, is the extent to which the IWA did not take the form of an explicitly revolutionary organization, but instead engaged in what might be called class politics in ordinary times. This is not merely a matter of its rhetoric. To be sure, blah, 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 blah. I'll get to this quote actually right here because this is the good stuff. So that's really important. I'm going to read that again, actually. What is so striking in its contrast is the extent to which the IWA did not take the form of an explicitly revolutionary organization, but instead engaged what might be called class politics in ordinary times. And we'll see where Marx and kind of just the broader IWA in general did this in here in just a sec. So this is a quote from a letter between Marx and Engels, of course, where he gets past the stuff talking about his disgusting illnesses and his need for money. And he says, it is very difficult to frame the thing so that our view should appear in a form that would make it acceptable to the present outlook of the workers' movement. It will take time before the revival of the movement allows for the old boldness of language to be used. So, I mean, if you agree with that, that has some pretty interesting implications, right? Because I think that McNair and people like him are certainly right to always want to be the party of opposition, right? You never agree, you never throw your backing behind a bourgeois political party or your own thing. You support it when it, or you don't support it, but you support the measures that it puts forward to maybe support the, like anything that can help the working class. You obviously support, but you are opposition, so you'll never actually support the bourgeois parties. But here it's interesting because it kind of calls into question, it's like, how much of this language do you use? I think for people that have done kind of like any organizing in the past, this is kind of like a funny question because it's like, I know that we've all kind of come across, you know, like people who just in like daily organizing, whether it's with like a union or even just knocking on doors, right, for like bourgeois political candidates, will like be a little bit too forthcoming with their views on like the Soviet Union or something like that. And it's like, normal people do not want to hear this stuff, buddy. Let's just keep it to ourselves. Nobody needs to be talking about Mao and like trying to organize regular people, unless they want to talk about Mao, which would be very funny. But this is, I don't know, this is a really good point. It's very difficult to frame the thing so that our viewpoint should appear in a form which would make it more acceptable to the present outlook of the workers' movement. It will take time before the revival of the movement allows for the old boldness of language. Are you following the new book coming from Alpha to Omega? Oh my God, of course I am. I can't. I'm on goddamn pins and needles for that book to come out. Donald, you want to give us an update on that? How's it going? Let us know. Hopefully this isn't like a stressful question. I can imagine it's horrible to have people be like, how is the book going? And it's like, yeah, I'm doing my best. I'm really trying to get it done. But while we're waiting for that update, I'll just say that again here it's very interesting because Marx appears to be very like understanding that you need to tailor your rhetoric to the like stage of development or whatever that the working class is at, which is a pretty interesting, obviously like a pretty interesting idea. It might seem pretty banal, you know, where it's like, okay, don't go around talking about like, you know, your favorite Bolshevik or whatever when you're trying to organize regular people. But it also kind of implies that there needs to be a constant, like, who's the guy, the OODA loop guy? He's like some, like, I don't know, like evil sicko guy. Like a military guy. I forget his name. John Boyd or something like that. I forget. Anyway, he has this idea called the OODA loop, which is, I think it stands for like observe, orient, direct, and like act or something like that. And this definitely implies that there needs to be, in the system of organizing for your political movement, political party, whatever you want to call it, that there needs to be a constant observation of maybe like the development of the working class and like where they're at and how you can possibly be like orienting yourself to respond to its level of development, I guess, which seems like a big ask, but maybe it's not. I mean, if you're doing this at like a community level, it probably isn't, because you would like know a lot of the people and be like, okay, nobody wants to hear about this. But as things heat up, whether economically or just in your general political struggle, you can start to be like, okay, we don't want the guillotines to come out quite yet, but also like, we are, just a reminder, we're here for like the overthrow of the existing order in its entirety. So I think that's definitely some important stuff there, and it's something that I think we can all remember, because it's also like, I don't know, who wants to like tailor their language, you know what I mean, to like, I don't know, to like, I don't know, it feels a little bit like you're pandering to like pearl clutching a bit if you're really catering your language a lot, but it's also like, oh yeah, you're dealing with normal people, and normal people don't necessarily want you to like, talk about stuff that's going to freak them out. Observe, orient, decide, act. There you go. I'm glad somebody knows what they're talking about. But yeah, the OODA loop, right? So this kind of seems to imply something like that in terms of rhetoric, which I think is very interesting. And then Comninel goes on to say, if the workers were not ready for bold language, they certainly did not found their association to undertake revolution. So he's talking about the IWA here. Yet this clearly was no rebirth of old revolutionary politics did not prevent Marx from interpreting the fact that the meeting was chock full as a sign that there is now evidently a revival of the working classes taking place, which is very exciting. So, or it was exciting. I mean, this didn't happen like recently. So yeah, that's just something that's definitely worth remembering. I mean, even just on an interpersonal level, right? Like, how much do we really want to, like, I don't know, freak people out? Like, always read the room is what Marx is saying. Always read the room. So I'll just keep reading, starting from here. And far from holding back the association, to the founding of which he was invited as a non-speaking presence on the platform, he accepted membership not only on the Provisional Organizing Committee, but on the subcommittee charged with drafting a statement of rules and principles. It's kind of funny. People must have shown up, and there are all these famous, like working class leaders and stuff, and there's like this like weird, smelly German sitting in the back. He doesn't say anything for the entirety of the first meeting, and then he's just like writing their program, which I think is very funny. The difference is also not simply a matter of stated objectives. In the manifesto, for example, the stated goals include a graduated income tax and free education for all children in public schools, blah, 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 blah. So, moving on. Yet where the manifesto was directly a call for revolution, the founding documents of the International, the policies adopted at its congresses, and the organizational undertakings over the course of its existence all focused on precisely the task of building and uniting in the open a mass political instrument for the working class. And I think that this kind of gets to answering my question of like, well, what makes it different? If Marx is like, wow, you don't want to join some revolutionary cadre, man. Like, that's just going to be all bad, man. But then he's like, I'm going to join the IWA. I think this, like, why, I don't know, what's the big difference? I think that this actually gets to answering my question, right? So I'm going to read that one more time. Yet where the manifesto was directly a call for revolution, the founding documents of the International, blah, 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 over the course of its existence, all focused on precisely the task of building and uniting in the open a mass political instrument for the working class. And that's very much what it is, right? It's a mass political instrument. That's the whole point. They were trying to create an institution that the working class could use, right? And that it could use easily, and that could kind of try to get it to the level of the abstract, to kind of use some of the language that Marx uses in Capital, like in our day-to-day struggles, whether you're like organizing with people at your job, or you work at like a soup kitchen or something like that, or you're trying to like give homeless people a place to sleep or something like that. However you're working with the working class, you're doing it on a concrete interpersonal level. And the whole point here was to try and allow the class to act on an abstract level, right? To act as a class on its own, right? So the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, they have this. They're called political parties, right? If you're in America, it's the Democrats or the Republicans. Unfortunately, in England and the UK now, it's also the Labour Party, as well as obviously the Tories. But they also have the World Bank. They have, central banks. They have all sorts of they have armies, right? These are all different tools that the capitalist class can use to act on an abstract level, to act as the class in motion, right? It's the distinction. It's the class for itself. It's a class in itself versus the class for itself. You know what I mean? So the IWA was an attempt to give the working class an arm to work as a class, right? And to kind of get it to that point where it's able to kind of like wage class war back against the capitalist class. Um, so I think that's gonna lead in nicely when we start talking about Stafford beer, because it's like that's what cybernetics is, right? On one hand, cybernetics is an attempt, at least to me, to understand just from an impartial level, like, fucking like how these systems operate, to understand, command and control in the animal and the machine. But on the other hand, it's also an effort to kind of like build systems and to create abstract entities where you might just have a bunch of different system ones, you know what I mean? Operational units that aren't really in communication with each other. And that's actually, Dan and I were talking about this off mic, which is to say in our normal lives recently. We were trying to think of like, if you had to pick one system of the viable system model that is missing in capitalism to talk about the economy as a whole, what is it that's missing that's could be the most important thing? And I remember a while ago I said that it doesn't necessarily have like a system two. It doesn't really have a way for all of these different operational firms to communicate with each other because everybody's in competition, et cetera, et cetera. But Dan also just made the point that it just barely has a meta system. The meta system that it has exist in individual firms, things like Walmart, all the planning that goes on in those firms and stuff, and states. But states, obviously, you know, it is not, their word isn't necessarily law. So their capitalist economies are missing a meta system as well as a system two. So something to remember. And also a system three, I guess. They pretty much got system ones, and that's about it. So I'm going to skip way forward here. Yes, you're right. We definitely do need much better descriptive names for Burian systems. I'm sure they exist, but it takes a lot of my brain power just to remember the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I couldn't tell you what they are. So this next bit we're gonna go through is definitely the spiciest headline of something that we've read, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just very obvious. But this is the section Marx was not a Leninist. And this is, you kind of start to see some of Comninel's political thought coming out here, right? Which is interesting. And it's honestly something I don't really know too much about. Actually don't know how prolific he was other than this book, because it's the only thing I've actually heard of his. And it is very good, but I don't really know too much else about it. So I don't really know too much about his political thought. And I also haven't really been through this, as you can tell by the lack of highlighting. It's just 3 pages, so maybe we just actually go through the whole thing, because I would like to know why Marx was not a Leninist. I love how he starts it, though. He says, of course Marx wasn't a Leninist. Lenin hadn't even yet turned 13 when Marx died. And it's like, oh, okay. He should have just ended it there just as a troll, but what are you going to do? Yet the issues of Marx's politics have been approached from Lenin's perspective for more than 100 years now. Often even by non-Leninists. This is not the place to take up a serious critique of Lenin, and one must be careful not to trivialize or reduce his ideas to simplistic creatures. It is instructive, however, to locate Marx's politics concretely in the relation to those proposed by Lenin, and to the contrast between the two. So let's get into it. If the emancipation of the working class... Okay, this is important, so I'm going to highlight this. If the emancipation of the working class, and with it the whole of humanity, because this is like the first universal class, right, was to be the task of the workers themselves, then the first requirement was the development of the capacity of that class to act in their own interests. So I really dig that. I really like that. It puts it in terms that I kind of understand, right? If we really want the working class to emancipate itself, all of us to, reach this higher plane of existence that we call socialism or whatever, the first thing we need to do is create institutions and organizational forms that allow it to act in its own interests. Because, the fucking, what's the quote? It's the Winston Churchill quote, right? Where he says something along the lines of, the best argument against democracy is like a 5-minute conversation with the average voter, which is just like such an evil thing to say and such a sicko thing to say. That thought is like so prevalent amongst people now, right? And on one hand, you kind of understand why. It's because all people see politically is like at least in America, all anyone gives a shit about is like every 4 years you get the presidential result and that's it, right? and I forget exactly who said it, but American presidential elections, every 4 years we get to pick between an idiot and a psychopath, and it's like that every fucking 4 years. Most working class people don't vote, but if you take American presidential elections or just like midterm elections even to be like the apotheosis of working class and like just or even just like societal politics in general, um, then you're gonna kind of be like, wow, these people are idiots. But first of all, we know because we're materialists that that's like bullshit for many reasons. One, as I just said, because a lot of working class people just don't fucking bother voting because why would they? There's no real point. Everything kind of sucks and not really much is gonna change depending on which presidential candidate you vote for. And secondly, because obviously like ideology plays a role and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it's gonna kind of like cause people to act, against their own interests. But also, there's like more material stuff, like fucking people's retirement plans being tied to like the stock market. Which when I found out I don't know, when I found out that's how it worked, I was like, huh, that's evil. So what are you gonna do? So that is to say that the first step should be actually building institutions where we can actually see this class interest. And don't anybody in the chat tell me that there isn't a class interest. I'm gonna fucking freak out. Um, Donald says, "Hat true. He must have problems with." Oh yeah, okay, I see. This is gonna be Donald. You're a celebrity in the chat. I will say, everybody very excited about this book. Um, uh, it's gonna be a good one. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I don't need to get into it. It's like the two things that I'm like most interested in terms of like socialist thought, obviously, right? Like trying to adapt what we're talking about here, like systems theory, to GIC or GIK, economic planning. Actually, don't remind me. We got an email recently from someone who listens to our show who sent us like the most fascinating email all about their work. Planning, how can I even describe it? Like they work in agriculture on like small farms, and they told us that they've been trying to plan things, trying to plan that farm based on labor time accounting, and they were also kind of telling us all about their ideas with in terms of agriculture and systems theory, specifically like Bayesian cybernetics, and like how agriculture is, that didn't need to convince Dan and I of this, agriculture is like an absolutely vital part of socialist planning, and it needs to be treated as its own thing. Remind me about that, because I'll send it to you, because I actually think you'll find it very interesting. So anyway, getting back to this, blah 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 blah. It is precisely in this regard that Marx's conception of class politics comes to the fore and can be seen to be inherently different from the politics of reformists, insurrectionists, anarchists, and Leninists alike. I will say, Bakunin, not my favorite person on the planet, but very. He knew how to have a good time with his politics. I'll say that. He knew how to just like, I'm just gonna get up today and do the revolution because I think it's gonna be fun, and I respect that. I think it's very funny, even if his politics are maybe not so good. Oh, you work in farming? Interesting. What part of the world? Obviously, you don't need to like give me your home address, but like, are you in North America, in Europe? Are you on like a co-op or something like that? Or yeah, let me know. Let me know. I'm interested in that. Fucking, to tell you what, I got one of these schmuck office jobs now. I went from working in a warehouse to working just doing like crappy admin. Fucking sucks being inside all day. Today, I had like an hour in between finishing work and starting this, and I just went out and spent it entirely at my allotment. There was no work to do, but I just needed to like sit and be outside. So working at farms, pretty good. Oh, Oregon, NGO. Ah, very nice. Hopefully you haven't been threatened by any wildfires in the past. I mean, Oregon doesn't get any of its water from the Colorado River, so hopefully you're set there. But yeah, hopefully you're ready for the up and coming water wars. I don't know if anybody's been paying attention. We will get back to this in a second, but we need more Broadbean content. Yeah, all right. Yes, we do. Should live stream the next Broadbean harvest. Have you been following the Colorado water wars in terms of like the new contracts needing to be kind of written up about who gets what water between like all of the states that get it: California, Arizona, what is it, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada? I think those are all of them. It's bad stuff. It's very scary, and it kind of just seems like California's throwing its weight around to be like, we actually want to get all of the water and fuck the rest of you, because there just is not enough water anymore for the existing contracts as they currently exist to be honored. So they need to be rewritten, and nobody's agreed on it. And it seems like old Sleepy Joe's gonna have to step in. Yeah, get cap water. It seems like Arizona is gonna get fucked. Honestly, I hate to say it, but like, yeah, it seems like might start to see some people moving out of Arizona just because California is so outweighs the rest of the states, and Arizona seems like it's just gonna get by far the crap end of this deal. So we'll see. Reservations, they don't even use their allotments. Yeah. We do on yeah, community farming I think is like a very vital, call me like a hippy dippy, but I think that like actually getting more people involved in the agricultural process in any way is like a vital part of building socialism. Call me crazy, but I absolutely think that it is. And not just for the reason that it's fun, but also because it's obviously the most important fucking productive thing that we do, and we need to radically change it. And I will say this, I'm going to go on a limb and say something kind of, well, probably not controversial, maybe controversial. I don't think central planning, or even just like rational planning, quote unquote, can deal with the monumental task of how we actually need to completely change our the way that we produce food, because it's a lot more than just oh, stop growing these things because they're horrible, or stop using petrochemicals, which would be huge and would be like a massive first step, right? Agrochemicals made using like fossil fuels. It has a lot more to do with growing things in the right way and growing the correct plants in the right places, and trying to like bring back native pollinators and not just having a bunch of goddamn honeybees. It's pretty gnarly. Is Charles Dowding a comrade? Do I have bad news for you? Do I have bad news for you? Charles Dowding, every once in a while, he'll post something on Twitter that's just like, huh? What do you mean by that, Charles? Like the other day, well, not the other day, but like relatively recently, he posted something that was like a link to like a vaguely anti-vaccine COVID vaccine thing, and was just like, huh, interesting. So like he didn't like, obviously we all know what that means, but I just thought it was very funny because he didn't say like outwardly like, fucking vaccines, they're turning everybody dumb, you know, don't take them, I got the shakes when I got them. But he was doing the like typical like Tiva wearing hippy dippy thing, liberal thing, which is just like, interesting, perhaps there is something to the idea that the COVID vaccines are making the frogs gay or something like that. It was just like a, so maybe not a comrade, but a cool guy nonetheless. What are you gonna do? I will say, if anyone is interested in learning more about this stuff, Poor Pearl's Almanac is the place to start. If you like podcasts, they interviewed somebody who started who helped to start a community-led natural farming nonprofit in Andhra Pradesh, and now they have like some absurd number of people, like 500,000 people producing without petrochemicals. Go listen to it. It's absolutely fascinating. I'd love to get that guy on the show because he just seems like he's solved it pretty much. But that is to say, producing agriculture sustainably, not simple. And it's not as simple as getting rid of the monocultures and stopping, you know, using petrochemicals. So what are you going to do? Are there Marxist studies for efficient agriculture? Seems very interesting to me. I should look more into that, because that would be sick. I mean, I think that it's something that has been radically understudied in terms of Marxism, and I think that a lot of it has to do with people not wanting to sound like hippies. I hate to say it. It's like Marxists are always trying to distance themselves from like moral arguments, which I find very funny, and that goes back to Marx. I think that that's not a great thing. I get it. I get why Marx was like, oh, I'm being a scientific socialist. I don't want to be moral about my socialism. Because he was kind of reacting against like moral arguments for it, and he was trying to be like, no, actually scientifically the world will end if we don't, you know, like get our shit together. But I think it's a similar thing. I think it's Marxists trying to distance themselves from the hippy dippy liberals, which, yeah, who can blame them? Definitely right about, oh, in organics there's a lot of anti-vax. There is. It's weird. It's very weird. It's like there's almost more there than in the like right-wing chuds. It's very, very odd. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do, people? Definitely right about agriculture. It's not something that can be reduced to some kind of objective function to be perfected. Yeah, and I think that's what scares me most about, like, as we're reading here. God damn it, I always do that incorrectly. As we're reading here, the kind of like Leninist central planning stuff, because it's just not that simple. I hate to say it. It might be for like I could be talking out of my ass, but I'd imagine you could probably. I mean, the Soviet Union showed that you could definitely like plan industry around central planning and like fucking like plan your military around it and win a world war. There's also incredible waste and underproduction and overproduction and all this stuff, so you wouldn't really want to do it. But whenever you hear anybody be like, it's just central planning, dude. I met a guy recently who is selling Socialist Appeal on the high street here. Which, side note about that, very funny. Every Saturday, at one end of my high street, there's Socialist Appeal, and at the other end, there's Socialist Worker. It's so funny. It's just like, you guys, oh my god, what a waste of fucking energy. What are you gonna do? But, yeah, such is life. India is on a whole nother level. Soviet Union has a terrible run on agriculture. That is correct. Uncontroversial statement. That is simply correct. But anyway, let's get back to this. Anyway, agriculture. More people should work in agriculture. More people should have it as a hobby. More people should understand how difficult it is to get things to grow on a large level without using massive amounts of fossil fuels. No-till is a great place to start. And it is a place to start. It is not a place to end. But yeah, it's very good. This is like anytime, we'll get back to this, but anytime you ever hear anybody be like, oh man, I just want to live off grid and produce all of my food on my own and like, just live off grid, man, and just grow my own beans and shit. That's a very romantic ideal, but it's also a very like Darwinian sicko idea because first of all, what are you going to do? Just go live by yourself and produce all your food? Secondly, that's lame. Secondly, you can't do that. You simply cannot fucking produce all your own food on your own. It's just impossible, and so it needs to be based around community organizing. Now I sound like an anarchist. What are you going to do? All right, back to this. It's precisely in this regard that Marx's conception of class politics comes to the fore and can be seen to be inherently different from the politics of reformists, insurrectionists, anarchists, and the like. We already went over this, but it's worth highlighting. Marx prepared to make great sacrifices to help the working class advance the struggle. It always remained, however, the self-organization of the workers that was central. That's getting a highlight. The self-organization of the workers, that is central. How easy is it to get? All right, one sec. I'm going to get another book. I am suspicious of this guy, but this book, I don't know if you can see the guy's name. The Social and Political Thought of Karl Marx, Shlomo Avenari. Suspicious of him, but this is pretty good from what I've read. He has an essay in here that Dan and I read for the show called The French Revolution and the Terror, the Achievements and Limits of Political Revolution, which gets into all of this stuff, why you can't just, like, lead the workers and tell them what to do and everything will be fine, because then they'll inherently see that everything's good once you, like, command them in your labor armies, that this is good, this is what the working class is used for. It has to be the self-organization of the workers. And I know that, like, people are going to come around and be like, oh, what does that mean? Like, gardening makes you want to kill foxes. I would tend to agree. I was at my fucking allotment today, and because I do a lot of no-till, the ground is very soft. They're just over there digging up my goddamn onions. I don't like it. My onions are having a hard time as it is with all this cold weather. So they need all the help they can get, and foxes running around, it's not great. Foxes, not great. Although I will say, I was on a walk yesterday, and there's like a large hill near me where I usually go up, and there's like a nice view of the town. I usually go up there at sunset if I want to go for a walk. And I just saw a fox just looking at the view in the spot that I usually sit. So I was just like, all right, fox, get out of my way. What are you going to do? I'm self-sufficient in garlic. I'm well on my way to being self-sufficient in garlic. I'll post some photos in the Discord when I get a moment of my allotment, which seems to be 95% garlic at the moment. Did your dad make you kill Manel's torn? Mine had me kill rattlesnakes to protect the animals. Even though I grew up in a place with a lot of like pesky creatures, rattlesnakes and stuff like that, I don't think I've ever killed anything like that. I don't think I'd ever want to. I don't eat meat. I used to eat chicken. Every once in a while I'll break edge and have a bit. I don't know. What are you gonna do? I can't kill a fox. I could probably kill a rattlesnake if it was like going after something, but I wouldn't want to. You know what I'm saying? Fox is about the killer out of me. Yeah. Well, yeah. They're so cute though, and they're so funny because they're so like they're like the raccoons of England. They're very funny. You can definitely see them like, yeah, they're very evil. But what are you gonna do? Well, they're not evil. They're just up to stuff. You can tell that they're always scheming, which I respect. I respect a good scheme. Anyways, getting back to this. Workers had to make themselves collectively into agents who would end the state's role as an instrument of class rule and remake their lifetime of labor from a means of enriching the few into a collective realization and enjoyment of human potential. No single institution leader, this is getting a highlight. No single institution, leader, or ideological conception was either sufficient or irreplaceable for that to be achieved. It is this commitment to development of the working class as such into a social and political force that is most clearly revealed in Marx's participation in the International. So this is basically answering my question of why is it that Marx dedicated so much of his time to the International as something that he thought was worthwhile, as opposed to like doing the Bakunin thing or the Blanquist thing or what we might go on to call the Leninist thing, or just join a fucking Labor Party. Obviously, he wasn't going to do that. Speaking of which, Marx never became a reformist, contrary to the views of Edward Bernstein, most notably, despite his efforts to ameliorate conditions of workers, engage in politics within existing states, and resist irresponsible calls to provocative action. Okay, that's extremely important. So what is it you need to do with your organization? You need to ameliorate the worst conditions of workers, which might lead you into, I'm not going to say coalitions with bourgeois parties, but it might lead you into supporting things that they put forward, never supporting the party, and make that abundantly clear. You need to engage in politics within existing states. Okay, you're doing that every day, so cool. And I don't know, just run people. I feel like if you have an organization around, just run people, even if you fucking lose, who cares? And resist irresponsible calls to provocative action. That's extremely important now more than ever, because it's like, I don't know. I feel like this is why in America the like right-wing militia movement is about like 99.9% feds, is because they get tucked into doing something really fucking stupid. They get picked up, and then they get released on the agreement that they become what are they called? Rats, basically, right? So it's like, work with the feds, you don't go to prison. And it's happened to all of them because they always get tucked into doing really fucking stupid shit. If you're organizing and somebody tells you to like do something violent and provocative, don't. Unless you have an extremely good reason to do it, just fucking don't, because not the best idea. Unless someone else is being hurt, you know what I mean? Unless like somebody's being like beaten up or something like that, and stand up for them. But other than that, it's a fucking bad idea, especially now. Catch up on the chat. What's going on here? Yeah, Tom, you should be working. What the hell? We're scheming, implementing the Dewey Decimal System on your bookshelves. Look at these people. Wow. Look at this. All right, so this is basically everything I wanted to talk about in the Leninist stuff. This whole section, though, is really, really good. Go get this paper. I'll put it in our Discord. It's free. But especially this section, Marx was not a Leninist. I think the last paragraph I'll read as well, just because why not? On one hand, globalization and the extension of genuinely capitalist social relations of production have brought about a far greater economic commonality than existed in the era of the First International. True. National historical and cultural differences are, of course, still very real, even within the confines of Europe, let alone globally. Yet with Chinese capitalists now opening sweatshops in Italy, that's news to me. And with urbanization, when was this written? And with urbanization and digital communications bridging, if far from eliminating many cultural divides, the capacity for international cooperation amongst labor movements is greater than ever. And actually, on that note, one of the reasons that the First International, or the Working Men's Association, was founded to begin with was, I believe, and someone correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe it was to help stop, like, quote-unquote, scabs. Actually, I kind of don't really want to call them scabs, even though they are scabs, coming in to specific countries to basically like be imported to go break strikes, right? Because let's say you're just like some schmuck, you don't have a job, living in the slums in Paris back then, and someone's like, hey, get on a boat and go work in England because there are a whole lot of jobs that suddenly just became available. Some people might be mad at you, but just totally do it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. You're going to be like, yeah, hell yeah, I need a job. Fuck it, I'll go to, the place with horrible cuisine. I'll go live there. Why not, if it means a job? But a part of this was to organize the working class itself in both of those countries to stop that from happening, and to kind of coordinate internationally the different working classes, which is something that we do not have now, and would be good. I'll say that. At the same time, on the other hand, despite enormous oppressive power of states, and intimidating anti-labor practices of multinational giants and small-scale employees alike, significant advances have been achieved with respect to the rights of workers. These rights certainly are abused on a daily basis, but they exist in ways that they did not exist 150 years ago, if therefore the situation then called for workers to come together and to find means to overcome not only profound social differences, but political differences as well. How much greater is both the need and the potential today? An important step would be to recognize the value Marx himself saw in a movement like the First International. So I was very worried that this paper was going to end with him being like, and that's why we need a new international. And it's like, oh, okay, a new international. Nobody's ever thought of that. Um, but it doesn't. It's basically just him being like, I think he recognizes that there are fundamental subjective and objective differences within I mean, obviously within our time and Marx's time. So he's basically saying you need to recognize what made this, why there was value in something like the International Working Men's Association, why it attracted Marx to take such a big chunk of his time to work with it, and try and replicate that. Not necessarily in like a new international. We need the sixth international, and that's what we need. But just in day-to-day organizing, maybe like trying to build up towards something like that, because you know, obviously someone like Bernie and people like Corbyn was a little bit better on this, but like people like that, they're still like so caught up in putting, you know, Bernie like America first. Obviously Bernie didn't say America first, but he was always like, we need to maintain American hegemony, you know what I mean? And so we need to really get away from that trapping of not just liberal politics, but progressive liberal politics. And even, I don't know, it exists in the working class for a reason, right? Like, there's a reason everybody in America likes to talk about how we're living in a post-industrial world, dude. Wow, we're really post-industrial world. With, you know, because they don't want to accept that those jobs have just moved somewhere else and that they still exist and that they're still really shitty. They're just like, we don't see them. And so there is going to be an inherent amount of like snobbery. But at the end of the day, if you can make the connection that your interests are much more tied to, you know, somebody making t-shirts in Bangladesh, then international cooperation will be made much easier. But let's stop talking about politics. Let's get into this. Let's get into some Stafford beer. This book rocks. This is, Dan and I read it for the show because it is the only Stafford beer book that we could get 2 copies of, and we didn't want to read PDFs. And it's excellent. What this book is a, how do you describe it? It's like a manager's handbook. So it's a bit bourgeois. Where's my copy? Yeah, here. It's a bit bourgeois, and it's a bit, I mean, he's clearly writing this for capitalist managers, but you can kind of read in between the lines and even just explicitly and see that he's working towards something that is much more autonomous and just functional than capitalist structures as well. So this book rocks, and it's full of, let me scroll through and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's full of little like exercises for you to do to understand this stuff. Yeah, so every few pages he'll say, now do this. Let me zoom in on this a bit for you. That be too much? Yeah, whatever. Now do this, and then he'll be like, you know, you are a viable system. In which viable system are you embedded? So he's kind of like trying to get you to like, you know, do these exercises with him so that you really understand what's going on, and it's really helpful. I actually haven't read through Brain of the Firm in its totality. This is the only like book of his that I've read fully, but it's really great. It was written well after I think a lot of that other stuff, so it was like maybe him trying to cash in and get some money, and then the manager organization talk circuit. But it's excellent, and if it is your first Stafford beer book, I say go for it. So I'm just gonna pull out a couple of good things. Where is it? Okay, so this first couple paragraphs will be really, it might just be the exact same thing that's in Designing Freedom. If you've read or listened to Designing Freedom, this will be very recognizable to you. But he's basically talking about what this book is, and it's a way of, yeah, like I said, trying to get you to understand how organizations work and how to build proper ones. But this paragraph here is really, really excellent. Where he basically says, hitherto the approach to the oh wait, no, not this one. Is that this one? Oh yeah, it is this one. Hitherto the approach to the organizational structure has had only one tool, the family tree organizational chart, right? This is like CEO, I don't know, what the fuck are they called? Under CEOs, and then like, you know, management, supervisors, all that stuff, and then the actual workers, right? Typically, this chart has been frozen out of history. It is it's teleological genealogy, which is a good singer. Things have got like this because events, blah, 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 have led to this and not to something else. The organizational structure has been rationalized after the event. And there it sits, it's just sitting there, offering the manager its own explanation of how things work. I wonder why we're looking at this. Why could we possibly be looking at this paragraph from Stafford Beer? It couldn't possibly have anything to do with that. Well, but basically, like, he's saying that this kind of like post-fact, like post-event rationalization, there's a word for that, I forget what it is, post-event like rationalization, it happens in capitalist structures like a lot, obviously. This is the reason that, you know, we've seen innovation in organizational structures and like the People's Republic of Walmart stuff, Amazon, things like that. But it also happens in quote-unquote Marxist organizations, right? It happens all over on the left. And I would say that that's kind of all the left is at the moment. It's not all the left is, but it's a good chunk of it. It's people being like pointing to their revolution of choice, whether that's 1917 or whether it's the anarchist revolutions in Spain or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and being like, that works, which first of all, we're going to need, citation needed on that one, but also they're just rationalizing completely after the fact. And that's what we want to get away from. It's not super scientific and it's not good. So where are the other bits that I've selected? Hopefully this all got saved. One thing I will say, actually, I'm going to zoom in on this. This is really, really important, and I didn't understand this element of the viable system model until I read this book. And it's the reason why, if you go to the video that we made on the viable system that's on our YouTube channel, this is not covered in there, and it's a mistake, because it should be. This recursive structure, I didn't understand when I was doing, I didn't understand it properly, and I didn't realize it when I was doing the research, when Dan and I were doing the research for that video, because I just thought it was it's exactly what he's saying here, right? Like, there's a viable system model within, I thought it was just the operational units, but he's saying, no, it's actually, works in tandem with each little subsystem here. And so each, management node here of the operational unit has within it its own little 3, 4, and 5. And, systems 2, and, the operational units 1 here, again, yeah, we do need better names for these things, exist within their own little circle here, right? Their own little operational theater. I didn't actually understand that. It seems like a small thing, but I think it's really not, because once you understand the way that 3, 4, and 5 here operate within the broader structure of the bigger viable system model, then it really starts to make sense. Oh, okay, that's how it's recursive, because it isn't just recursive because each operational unit is its own thing. You have to understand the relationship here, which I did not when we did that video, so there is a mistake in there. But what are you going to do? Fix it? Not going to do that. Also, he gets in here. I'm just going to look at my paper copy because I've probably got it circled here. He gets in here and he talks a lot about what is a viable system and what isn't. And I think that this is very important when we talk about organizing as well, because, well, actually it might be a little bit later. Where is it here? Because he makes the point that one of his little exercises is, it's basically imagine a firm, now imagine each department in that firm. Is each department its own thing, its own viable system model? And he makes the point where he's basically for almost all of them, no. And he says a good rule of thumb to trying to understand these things is if you can, what he says, skive off these little sub-operational units, could they be their own viable system model and operate functionally on their own? So for example, he's you might think of the graphic design department of some big firm or revolutionary movement or something like that. Or let's use something more revolutionary. Say the protest defense security guys. You want to go and have I don't know, some sort of showing of power or protest or something like that. You don't want to get your ass kicked by a bunch of right-wing chuds. Those people, is that its own operational unit? Is it its own viable system model? And to answer the question, could you skive it off and have it be its own unit? No, because if that thing exists on its own, the security force or whatever, or the fucking graphic design department, it would not exist. How could you have a graphic design department existing outside of a system? It wouldn't exist because it serves the broader thing. So he says when you're modeling these things, you really need to understand that, because you wouldn't necessarily say say you were trying to build a working class movement that was like regional, and you wanted to say like, okay, we have our overarching viable system model, which is like to pick a random place, like the revolutionary movement of Hawaii, right? And you have like different you have like the overarching viable system model, which kind of coordinates everything amongst the islands. But then let's say like on each island you had the like Maui Revolutionary Party, which you could skive off, so that would be its own little viable system model, right? Or the revolutionary, you know, subsection of like what are the other islands, like Oahu or something like that, right? Like you could skive those off and have them be part of a broader like continental movement with say like North America or something like that. But what you couldn't do is be like, here is the like, you know, again, to use the thing again, here's the like graphic design department of that. I don't know why you need a graphic design department for a revolutionary movement, but you couldn't skive off like different operational units like that. And so once you understand that, then you start to see, okay, so where is the accountability, and you start to fill in the gaps and go, okay, so these things have their own like budget or whatever, or they're able to do make all of these decisions on their own. But say like this, you know, like the security people or whatever, or the people working on soup kitchens, or the people working on organizing in trade unions, could you actually skive them off and have them be their own Bible system models? Perhaps not. So just something to keep an eye on. I know that seems like a banal point, but when you're actually trying to build structures, like going through this book, I was really trying to like model different potential revolutionary movements and how they would relate to the viable system model. And once you understand where the accountability is and what actually is its own viable system like subunit, um, it changes quite a bit, right? Because it's really easy to like try and map all of that stuff out and then be like, oh, I've just built like an organizational family tree. And that's bad. That's what he's trying not to do. Although having said that, there is one line in this book where he's like, if your model looks like mine, like if you've modeled your organization out, your revolutionary movement or whatever, if you've modeled it all out and it looks like the viable system model that I have in this book right here, if it looks like this one, you've done it wrong. So he's basically saying there's a lot of room for experimentation with organization, and you need to really make it fit your own circumstances. So as long as you're following the like, I think arrows of everything, as long as you're following like, okay, you know, you got your different systems, of course, 1 through 5, but you also got your little algedonic node to make sure all the subunits are all doing okay, the operational theaters, they're all doing okay, and you're understanding where your variety is being attenuated or amplified amongst all of those different things. As long as you understand that, it can look radically different. And actually, if I feel like if we scroll forward, a lot of them do look pretty radically different in this book. But we will get to that. As you can see here, he's just doing some kind of basic stuff about the environment. And for anyone who wasn't listening, I feel like when to bring it back to ecology and stuff, I feel like, I'm just going to repeat this point. When we talk about like the world ecology debates versus like metabolic rift, I feel like you really can't. Also, this drives me fucking nuts. There's a hair on like every page of the scan, and it's the same hair. It's like, how did that happen? Where was this hair? I guess on the scanner. Anyway, when we talk about those debates between like metabolic rift and world, you know, or just like any red-green debates ever, where people like to talk about, oh, is it humanity versus nature, or is it more of like a Bookchin kind of like anti-Cartesian, like, no, it's not environmentalism, it's ecology. Where do we place ourselves within our broader environment? I feel like you can't really ever answer those questions without having an understanding, at least a basic understanding of systems theory, because like the way in which beer here is able to kind of like, I don't know, model out operations, metasystem, and environment, like it answers that question easily. It's basically saying you can't study a system without studying its broader environment. And that isn't to say that like the environment is some external thing. It's actually just a vital part of the system itself. So why would you even try and say that it's not a part of it or a part of it? It just exists there. So we did it. We solved the red-green debates. Systems theory. It's stuff that ecologists should actually read. As much as I love the Jason Moore world ecology stuff, it is just an ontology. It doesn't really actually feel like science. Where's this bit? I feel like I highlighted a bit in here somewhere. Maybe I didn't. Here we are. Okay, this is like the most important part in the entire book, right? Okay, so if you're following along at home, section 3 here, whenever there's anything in red, it's either a, what would you call it? Like a exercise that he wants you to do, or it's very important. So he says, you should have, because he's basically in this whole book, you should have the organization that you're trying to map. So he says, if you have your system ones beside you and you think about each case as the inevitably more general discussion unfolds, first of all, you need to grasp this nettle. The management of the system in focus, which is basically like which level of recursion are you on, called the senior management, is in principle unable to entertain all of the variety generated by any one, never mind all, of its subsidiary viable systems that constitute System 1. So if we use our Hawaii example, the Revolutionary Party of Hawaii, the Revolutionary Viable System Model Party of Hawaii, there's no way that like the meta system of that entire island could keep up with all of the revolutionary comings and goings of the subunit in focus, which is the Revolutionary Viable System Model Party of Maui or of Kauai or of Oahu, right? So he's basically saying that, well, we'll get to actually what he's saying. He says, that is the beginning of a theory of autonomy or of decentralization, and it lies in this central fact rather than in political theory. That's very controversial, I feel like, especially among the kind of Marxist-y left, although, I don't know, people are starting to get it. This is a nettle to grasp because senior management often assumes and likes to exercise the power to poke around in the intimate managerial detail of its subsidiaries in System 1. But think, you can imagine him doing the clap emojis in this book, but think, the so-called prerogative to intervene indiscriminately does not have requisite variety. Anyone who has ever had a job in their life knows exactly what he's talking about here. This is why people don't like their bosses, because bosses just poke around when you're trying to get on with your work and they just mess everything up. I remember at my last job when I was working at like a agricultural like feed store, fucking sucked ass. I was working in the warehouse, and it was basically the structure of that was like there were us schmucks in the warehouse, and we had a couple of supervisors who would rotate in and out, right, on the rota. And then there were two managers who would sit in their office and watch everything on the CCTVs and like call us up on the warehouse phone and be like, you did that incorrectly. Actually, I would like this organized like that. And it actually kind of taught me an interesting lesson about like the supervisors hated that, right? As much as I was kind of fucking, here's this hair again, god damn it. As much as I like really didn't like being told what to do by my supervisors, they at least, I think that their interests were very much in line with the rest of us working in the warehouse, just because like they didn't like the kind of like poking and prodding that management did, and there was very much a gap there. Obviously there was like a gap in terms of hierarchy and domination or whatever, if you want to use that language, between like us, the scum sucking bottom feeders in the warehouse, and our supervisor, just because of like nobody likes being told what to do. But realistically, like the division really came between management, who was not physically present in the warehouse trying to tell us how to do things. And when I quit, I went back a couple months later, and those managers had also left, and they were replaced by someone who was much more just do your own thing, dude. Let me know when you need something, right? And she took me on a tour of the warehouse, and it was like spotless. The warehouse used to just be like a like health and safety mess. There were like pallets stacked everywhere on like the shelves. Like oh my god, I remember one time like someone took the forklift and like we used to have these huge stacks of probably about like 50 25 kilo sacks on per pallet of like chicken feed, and someone took it and took the forklift because they weren't properly trained, and like they were trying to get the thing down and like stabbed it directly into the chicken feed, and the whole thing just collapsed and went fucking everywhere. Nothing like that was happening anymore because nobody was very stressed. It was all very clean. Everyone was like happy in the warehouse, which none of us were ever happy. They all had the proper equipment, and this is basically just to say like once the new manager grasped, oh, people actually work better to just when they're just like left alone, and like they use you as a tool, they use management as a tool, things are much better, things operate much smoother, and people are happier. And they also trust this like meta system, quote unquote, a lot more. In this book, he goes on to talk about how I think it's like when he was in Chile, a lot of people didn't trust the like auditors. This might have been in the book Cybernetic Revolutionaries, the Edith Medina book, where she talks about this, but people didn't trust the broken 50-pound bags at feed stores abound so bad. It's just the worst. It's just terrible. And also having to carry those things fucking sucks. Make them in like much lighter, please. I would prefer that. But she makes the point that people, one of the main problems with his viable system as it existed in Chile was that people didn't trust the auditors who were going around and making sure that everything was okay, basically like working for the meta system. But that's only because they didn't understand. Actually, it's in this book. They didn't understand what, and this also wasn't in Chile. I got the story completely wrong. Regardless, there was an example where people didn't trust their auditors, and it was because they had no idea what they were doing. Right? Who are these people that are showing up, giving us like a grade and telling us what to do? And the example that Beer gives is like. It was some people who were trying to get involved in production control, right? And that can seem like a very scary thing because like someone's showing up from a different city and telling you stop producing as much or more, we need a lot more. And you think, and if they're just doing it for profit incentive, you're like, fuck off, who cares? But if you're really able to build a like viable system where you understand why that person is engaging in product control and you see the direct benefit of it, ooh, that's excellent. So he's basically saying, you know, classic Beer, don't get rid of the auditors, just make it obvious what they're doing. And I would say make them like democratically, you know, controlled, obviously. But hey, that's just me. I'm a goddamn communist. So anyway, we should get back to this bit. Just because he says, yeah, intervening, as we're saying, intervening indiscriminately, it just can't be done well. And I currently have a boss, I'm extremely lucky, who just kind of fucking lets me get on with things, which is very, very cool, because most of my bosses in the past have not done that, and it's a huge pain in the ass. But, you know, this is just another interpersonal example, but when it's just like, hey, you getting on with that thing? And I'm like, yeah, and they're not like, let me see, what are you doing? How are you doing? What are you doing today? Let me see your calendar. If they're just like, okay, get on with it, I'm fucking, oh my god, this is just because I'm an asshole, but man, I'm way more productive if I have someone doing that. So he's making a scientific argument for it here, being like, you literally physically can't do that. You can't intervene indiscriminately and expect things to work. But it is fascinating here, right? That he's saying that this bit here, this is the beginning of a theory of autonomy, not in political theory, which, okay, we can have both. We don't need to like pick sides or whatever, but it's really fascinating. Very, very fascinating indeed. Management, the meta system will never have enough variety to intervene indiscriminately and have it make sense. So don't even try. I mean, everybody tries because that's just the way that capitalist structures work. My god, at my new job, oh god, some bad things are coming. At my new job, they've just started up again doing some voluntary redundancy stuff, and when this started a couple years ago, it moved quickly to involuntary redundancies, which nobody likes. But it's so funny because it's like they always try and get the people who are getting paid like nothing to quit, whereas like there's like an obscene number of managers at my job. It's so funny. It's like they always seem stressed and they always kind of seem busy, but it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, how could there possibly be a need to have this many managers? And then all of the schmucks on my level are always just like, you know, we always got shit to do and it kind of sucks, but it's always like, you can't fire us. They're always trying to fire. I don't know. Anybody who's ever been through this kind of stuff, they know what it's like. But it's so funny because it's like that's not gonna make any difference. Firing a bunch of people on grades like 2, 3, and 4. You know what I mean? It's like, how's that gonna make a difference in your goddamn business? But what are you gonna do? We gotta have all of those managers. Should I tell this story? A dear friend of mine, I will say, a very close friend of mine who is a representative in his union, was dealing with. He works for like a company that does a lot of cleaning and stuff like that. And when this business is understaffed, well, I should say, basically recently in that business, they have redone their overtime policy where you have to work an extra 5 hours every week. And then your 6th hour will be overtime, if that makes sense. So you won't get overtime for working 5 hours past your contract if you're a cleaner or a janitor or whatever. You have to work 6 hours, and then that 6th hour will be overtime, which is really fucked up. But anyway, they were telling me that they say they do that because they don't have the budget, right? They don't have the budget for paying people overtime. But then when people say, well, then I'm not going to work overtime when you need more people, they turn around and hire people from an outside company, like a staffing agency or whatever. I don't really know how it works. And then they pay those people 3 fucking times the regular rate to clean. It's just like, it's like, that is so clearly a blatant example of disciplining the working class for the sake of disciplining the working class. It's just like, it's such a slap in the face. And then when this guy turns around and is like, hey, what the fuck? I thought you didn't have the money to do this. They go, oh, it's a different budget. It's like, oh, different budget. Yeah, I need access to that different budget. You know what I'm saying? What are you gonna do? All right. Is there anything else I want to talk about in this book? I suppose I should basically just try and say why I picked these 2 things to talk about. I think it is because, as much as he likes to say, it is from this nettle that we get the beginnings of a theory of autonomy and not this nettle. It's very much both, right? I mean, this is the stuff that you can talk to anybody about and they'll understand. Even like schmuck reactionaries are going to understand this, right? Like they're going to understand, oh, actually autonomous structures work better. They just need some sort of guiding hand, right? Much like a lot of anarchists could have perhaps used a little bit of the old dictatorship of the proletariat during their different revolutionary struggles. You need a little bit of a meta system. But it's the science of it all that makes this quite respectable, right? When you're building a revolutionary movement, how's stuff being attenuated? Where's accountability? All of this stuff to maximize autonomy, but also maximize function. Because it's not just going to work if you have a bunch of system ones. So I don't know. I have no idea how you fucking apply all of this stuff to like communist theory. I guess that's, Tom O'Donnell, I guess that's where your book's coming in. But presumably it has something to do with, democratic control in all aspects of this gosh dang viable system. Is there a model here that I can kind of point to? Where would be a good model? It seems very clear to me that this stuff, your system 2s, as well as your auditors, which he talks about later, need to be completely democratically controlled. You really would not want... well, I mean, fuck it, what am I saying? This whole thing needs to be democratically controlled. The whole meta system needs to be democratically controlled, but also there needs to be enough accountability and openness, I suppose, of what's going on, that you understand why the meta system is making the decisions that it does. And once all that stuff is open, once all of that stuff is understandable and people get why the meta system is making the decisions that it does, then presumably you won't just kind of like vote people out or whatever because you don't like the decision that they made. There would be a lot more understanding. So yeah, beer could use a little bit more of the old political understanding. But what are you gonna do? I think I was trying to find the like different models that I wrote down. I scribbled them down on a piece of paper when I was visiting back home, and they're just like lost to time. But I scribbled out like a bunch of different viable system models as I was reading this book, to model kind of what a perhaps revolutionary party could look like. And I think it's so clearly you're able to see that it ties in with what Comninel's talking about with the First International, because it is very much a instrument, right? It's an instrument for the working class to use. And if you're able to build these institutions, these organizational structures that allow for not just effective organizing, but effective action, like, you're going to see an upswing in proletarian momentum, just because right now, you see it, but it all just fizzles out because there's nowhere for it to go, right? And everybody just winds up working in soup kitchens and stuff like that because that's really the only like concrete thing you can do to help people. So, what do I want to leave everybody with? That Marx was not a Leninist, which I appreciate. In my more optimistic moments, I like sympathize so well with the like what do they call themselves? The like revival of Kautskiist and like Babelist kind of stuff. We all know what I mean. I think when I say that. But when I'm like feeling optimistic, I'm like, maybe that could work. Maybe that is just the way. If we just, it's like, I saw somebody tweet once. Someone was like, what are we supposed to do? And somebody said something like, step 1, read what is to be done. Step 2, do that. And they were completely serious, which fucking rocks. But in my more like, oh, actually, wait a minute, will this stuff work? Yeah, you go back to this stuff. You know what I'm saying? You go back to the Stafford beer. So I like to think all of that would work, but in reality, you need more patience than the strategy of patience, if you know what I'm saying, because you need to actually build institutions for the working class uh, to perform its struggles within, if that makes sense. To make a little organizational arena for them to actually carry out what they want, because that's the only way that we're ever going to get a long-term revolution. Um, but also, yeah, I don't fucking know, because, you know, the world's going to end in like 30 years, so such is life. Try your best, I guess. Try your best. On the most recent show, I was talking with Dan, and I was like, man, if we are getting like 4 degrees of warming by like 2050 or 2060, I don't know, man. Maybe like I always joke on the show that I'm a Maoist because I think it's very funny. But maybe it is time to go to the hills, if you know what I mean, because maybe it is time to like I don't know, I don't fucking know. And that's in my more dire times. But the only stuff that actually makes sense about building a revolutionary movement and one in which the working class can emancipate itself is this stuff. I hate to say it. It's systems theory, and you're not going to find all of your answers in Stafford Beer, because again, he's like pretty bourgeois. But the principles are good, and the OODA loop as well is also quite good. General Intellect Unit has a couple episodes where they talk all about the OODA loop, which are very, very good. Um, so yeah, those are the only things I want to leave with. I'm gonna end soon. Also, everybody needs to be making more food, or at least just, you know, understanding the state of the ecological struggle. And I hate to say it, but the only people really talking a lot about that are anarchists, because it is like very amenable to their kind of like ideology of community building and working with people with different ideologies, man. That you see a lot amongst anarchists. But yeah, food systems are much more complicated than I think we give them credit for. And even if we were to just switch over entirely to like the super crop, the one super crop that will help us all, that would still be a fucking ecological disaster, because it's just a different monocrop or monoculture. So, but then again, it's not even just that. It's, you know, it's super weeds. It's goddamn native plants. It's how you're going to get coffee to people in other places outside of, like, you know, the degrees of latitude or longitude, whatever, within the equator. So, you know, what are you going to do? Yeah, the huge project is that Tom and I are at is the application of this stuff to political organization, protest movements. Yeah, that's some good shit. That's we're all really excited to read about that, because I think this is kind of the most important stuff that we can be talking about. Or tanky via campesino. I've never come across a tanky via campesino person. I feel like my idea of via campesino people is like anarchists, but tanky via campesino, interesting. Maybe like Maoist via campesino people. I could see that. That sounds awesome. I hate to say it. That sounds like it kicks ass in a funny way. So yeah. All right, everybody. I'm gonna get going. Because it is a Friday night here, and I am just been staring at a computer all day. But if there are any, they are here. What, in Oregon? Oh God, Jesus, what is going on with the Pacific Northwest, man? There's a lot of like sus behavior going on up there. When I was a kid, I always just assumed it was like the crunchy granola types, but it's not, is it? There's a lot of suspicious things going on up there. Um, anyway, if anybody has anything, Chavistas, there you go. It sounds like an interesting crowd. Around here, yeah, don't get that. You definitely don't get that. Let us know if there's anything else you want us to talk about, either for the show or for the whole West Coast. Yeah, you don't have to tell me twice, goddamn. Or for another stream. If anybody wants to come on and talk about stuff too, by all means, let me know. I'm going to try and start doing these once a week. But we'll see, because I have real life, so I've been able to do it the past few weeks. But yeah, I'm gonna start doing them on YouTube as well, because Twitch kind of fucking sucks. So that's about it. Thanks everybody for watching. This is really, really fun.